He neglected his poor pregnant wife. He left her at home and walked into a luxury business event with his mistress, not knowing his wife was the CEO. What happened next destroyed his life in one night. Stay till the end, subscribe to this channel, and watch as one woman reclaims her power, her legacy, and her future. The elevator doors slammed shut just as Emily Walker's voice cut through the lobby. Ethan, wait. Too late. Ethan Walker didn't turn around. He adjusted his cufflinks, eyes already fixed on his reflection in the mirrored doors as the elevator began to rise. The soft hum of ascent swallowed her words whole. Behind him, Emily stood frozen, one hand pressed to her swollen belly as a sharp contraction tightened her breath. 8 months pregnant. Shoes scuffed. Dress plain. The kind of woman people looked past without guilt. She swallowed and steadied herself. Drive safe, she called again, softer now. Ethan lifted one hand in a careless wave without looking back. The elevator numbers blinked upward. Emily watched until the doors disappeared, then slowly lowered herself onto a leather bench in the lobby. Her phone buzzed in her hand, not a message from her husband, but a calendar reminder. Blackwood Venture Leadership Gala. 7 p.m. She smiled faintly. Across the street, the Blackwood Grand Hotel glowed like a promise made only to the powerful. Valets lined the curb. Cameras flashed. Men in tailored suits escorted women in silk and diamonds through the revolving doors as if they belonged there. Emily stood and crossed the street anyway. Inside the hotel, Ethan stepped out of the elevator into a different world. Crystal chandeliers. Low orchestral music. Laughter that sounded expensive. And waiting for him near the bar was Vanessa Brooks. Finally, Vanessa said, her lips curving into a smile that had been practiced in mirrors. She wore red, bold, unforgiving, impossible to ignore. I was starting to think you'd ditch me. Ethan laughed, already loosening. Never. Traffic was insane. She leaned in, fingers brushing his arm. So, tonight's the big night, huh? All the heavy hitters. Yeah, he said, pride swelling. This is where things start to change. Vanessa raised a brow. And your wife. The word landed heavier than he expected. Ethan hesitated just long enough to matter. She's not coming, he said quickly. Didn't feel well. Vanessa's smile sharpened. That's unfortunate. He knew what she meant. He just didn't care enough to correct her. They walked into the ballroom together. Emily reached the front desk, ignoring the curious glance from the concierge. I'm here for the gala, she said calmly. The concierge scanned her from head to toe. Invitation. Emily slid a black card across the counter. The concierge's eyes widened. Yes, ma'am. Of course. Emily passed through security without another word. Inside the ballroom, Ethan soaked it all in. The attention. The handshakes. The nods from men whose approval he'd chased for years. Vanessa stayed close, laughing at the right moments, touching his arm when people watched. This is impressive, she murmured. You really belong here. Ethan straightened. I've worked hard. He didn't see the irony. Across the room, a group of executives gathered near the stage, whispering. Staff adjusted microphones. The massive screen behind the podium flickered to life, displaying the Blackwood Global logo. Ethan glanced at it briefly, then looked away. Blackwood Global was the kind of company people spoke about in hushed tones. Powerful. Private. Untouchable. He'd never met the CEO. No one had. Vanessa leaned in again. So what do you actually do at your firm? You've always been a little vague. Ethan smiled. I handle growth strategy. I'm being noticed. She laughed. Well, tonight should help. High above them, in a private suite overlooking the ballroom, Emily watched everything on a silent monitor. The camera angles were perfect. The timing is precise. Her hand rested on her belly as the baby shifted. Not yet, she whispered. Because this moment wasn't about rage. It was about revelation. Downstairs, The host stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, tapping the microphone, "if I could have your attention." The room gradually quieted. Ethan felt a flicker of excitement. He liked moments like this, moments where important things happen near him. "We're honored tonight," the host continued, "to celebrate innovation, leadership, and vision." Polite applause. "And to welcome someone who prefers results over recognition." The lights dimmed slightly. Ethan frowned. Vanessa tilted her head. The screen behind the host went dark. Then it flickered. Emily inhaled. The screen came alive with a woman's face. Not tired. Not small. Sharp. Composed. Commanding. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The woman on the screen looked exactly like his wife. But not the version he knew. This version wore power like a second skin. Text appeared beneath her image. Emily Carter Walker. Ethan's smile collapsed. "No," he whispered. Vanessa turned slowly toward him. "What?" The text changed. "Founder and Chief Executive Officer. Blackwood Global." The room erupted in murmurs. Ethan staggered back a step, knocking into a chair. "That's not possible," he said louder now. "That's..." Vanessa pulled her arm away from his. "You said she was sick." The host smiled broadly. "Please welcome Emily Walker." The doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. Emily stepped inside. Every conversation died. She walked forward, 8 months pregnant, posture straight, eyes calm. No rush. No apology. Each step deliberate, echoing across the marble floor. Ethan felt something inside him fracture. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was exposure. Emily reached the stage and turned to face the room. Her gaze passed over Ethan without stopping. That hurt more than anger would have. The applause was thunderous. Vanessa stared at Ethan like she was seeing him for the first time, and not liking what she found. "You're married to her," she hissed. Ethan couldn't speak. Emily placed her hands on the podium. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady, amplified, impossible to ignore. "Thank you for being here." She paused. And smiled. Ethan realized in that instant that every lie he'd told, every moment of shame, every time he'd chosen image over loyalty, was about to be repaid in public. And if you've ever been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to love you, if you've ever been hidden, dismissed, or treated like an inconvenience, stay with this story. Subscribe. Because what comes next is the kind of justice people wait a lifetime to witness. Emily looked out at the crowd. Then, finally, her eyes found Ethan. And held. Emily didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room leaned toward her the way people do when they sense something irreversible unfolding. "I founded Blackwood Global 21 years ago," she said calmly. "Back when leadership rooms looked very different than this one." A few polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. Ethan felt the floor slipping beneath him. He searched her face for something, anger, spite, triumph, but found none. That terrified him more than rage ever could. Vanessa shifted beside him, arms crossed now, her earlier confidence draining fast. "You said your wife barely worked," she muttered. "You said she depended on you." Emily continued, "I don't appear publicly often. Not because I lack authority, but because power doesn't need noise." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the first row, where the board members sat straight-backed and attentive. Ethan recognized them. Men he'd tried to impress. Men who'd brushed him off. They were watching Emily like gravity itself had taken human form. "I'm here tonight," Emily said, "because this event is about leadership. And leadership deserves honesty." Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from his colleague. "Dude, that's your wife?" His chest tightened. Emily rested a hand on her belly, a subtle movement that drew the crowd's attention. "Yes," she added gently, "I'm pregnant. And yes, I've continued to run this company through every quarter, every negotiation, every acquisition, without asking permission. The applause this time wasn't polite. It was earned. Vanessa's nails dug into her palm. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" she demanded in a whisper. Ethan couldn't answer. Because the truth would make him look exactly like what he was. Ashamed. Emily smiled again, but this time, it didn't reach her eyes. "Tonight," she said, "we celebrate growth. But growth requires reflection. So I want to share a brief story." Ethan's stomach dropped. "This story," Emily continued, "is about proximity. How close people can be to power, and still misunderstand it." A murmur moved through the room. Ethan shook his head slightly, pleading without words. She ignored him. "For years," Emily said, "I chose a quiet life outside these rooms. I believed love didn't need status. That respect could exist without display." She paused. "I was wrong." The word hit like a gavel. Vanessa inhaled sharply. Emily's gaze locked onto Ethan now. Not with fury, but with clarity. "There are people who confuse humility with weakness," she said. "Who mistake silence for insignificance." Ethan felt heat creep up his neck. People were turning. Looking at him. Connecting dots. Emily leaned forward slightly. "And those people make dangerous choices when they think no one is watching." A beat. Then another. Ethan opened his mouth. But nothing came out. Because what could he say? That he'd introduced Vanessa as his associate? That he'd told people his wife wasn't really ambitious? That he'd avoided bringing Emily anywhere that reminded him she outshone him? Vanessa stepped back from him slowly, as if physical distance might separate her from the fallout. "You let me walk in here with you," she said quietly. "You let me believe." Emily lifted a hand. "Vanessa Brooks," she said, reading smoothly from the teleprompter Ethan hadn't noticed until now. "Senior marketing strategist." Impressive resume. Vanessa froze. "I want you to know," Emily continued, "this isn't about you." Vanessa swallowed hard. "This is about character." Ethan felt eyes boring into his back. If you've ever been blamed for someone else's insecurity, if you've ever been hidden because your light made someone uncomfortable, stay. Don't look away. Subscribe. Because this part is for you. Emily straightened. "Tonight," she said, "Blackwood Global announces a leadership audit." The board members exchanged glances. "Audit?" someone whispered. Emily nodded. "Of values. Of conduct. Of integrity. Including personal conduct that impacts corporate reputation." Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. "No," he whispered. Emily continued smoothly. "We'll begin with mid-level executives seeking promotion." Her eyes never left Ethan. "Effective immediately," she added. "All candidates will be reviewed." Vanessa stared at Ethan. "You said you were being noticed." He couldn't meet her gaze. Because now, he was. Emily closed her speech folder. "Enjoy the evening," she said softly. The applause was thunderous. As Emily stepped away from the podium, the host rushed forward, but she didn't stop. She walked straight past Ethan. He reached out instinctively. "Emily." She halted, turned, looked at him, not as a husband, but as a decision. "We'll talk later," she said quietly. Not a threat. A promise. Then she walked on. Vanessa let out a shaky breath. "I need air." She left without another word. Ethan stood alone, surrounded by people, and utterly exposed. His phone buzzed again. A new message. This one from an unknown number. "The board wants to see you. Now." Ethan looked toward the private elevator. And for the first time that night, he understood something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't the climax. This was the beginning. Ethan barely felt his legs carry him toward the private elevator. Every step felt heavier than the last, like the room itself was resisting him. Conversations resumed behind him, but the tone had shifted. Laughter now carried an edge. Eyes followed him, not with admiration, but with calculation. He caught fragments as he passed. That's him. Did you see her face? He brought another woman. The elevator doors slid open. Inside, the air was too still. Ethan pressed the button for the executive level. His reflection stared back at him in the mirrored walls, tie slightly crooked, color drained from his face, confidence cracked down the middle. 4 years, he'd told himself he was climbing. Now he realized he'd been standing on a trapdoor. The elevator chimed and opened onto a hushed corridor. Thick carpet. Soft lighting. Power disguised as calm. At the end of the hall, a conference room door stood open. Inside sat 6 board members. And Emily. She stood near the window, her back to him, city lights stretching beyond the glass. One hand rested on the sill. The other supported her lower back. "Close the door," she said without turning. Ethan did. The click echoed like a verdict. "Sit," she added. He obeyed. No one spoke for a moment. Then the chairman leaned forward. "Ethan, tonight raised concerns." Ethan swallowed. "I can explain." Emily turned slowly. "No," she said. "You can answer." The distinction stung. She took a seat at the head of the table, not ceremoniously, but naturally, as if that space had always belonged to her. "Let's start simple," she said. "Did you bring a guest tonight under pretenses?" Ethan's mouth went dry. "It wasn't. Yes or no?" "Yes." The word tasted like rust. "Did you represent yourself as unmarried?" Ethan hesitated. Emily tilted her head. This is where honesty usually fails. "Yes," he whispered. One of the board members exhaled sharply. Emily folded her hands. "Did you imply that your wife lacked professional relevance?" Ethan's shoulders slumped. "Yes." Silence. Emily nodded once, as if confirming data she already had. "For context," she said, addressing the board, "Ethan and I agreed early in our marriage that I would remain private." Ethan looked up, hope flickering. "That agreement," she continued evenly, "did not include erasing me." The hope died. A board member cleared his throat. "This puts us in a difficult position." Emily met his gaze. "No. It clarifies one." She turned back to Ethan. "You didn't lie because you were afraid," she said. "You lied because you were ashamed." The word cut deeper than any accusation. Ethan stood abruptly. "That's not fair." Every eye snapped to him. "You think this is about ego," he continued, voice rising. "You hid everything from me. You made me feel small. Like I didn't matter in your world." Emily's expression didn't change. "I hid money," she said. "Not respect." Ethan laughed bitterly. "You think people look at me the same way now? I'm finished." Emily leaned forward. "No," she said quietly. "You finished yourself. If you've ever been blamed for someone else's betrayal, if you've ever been told you were too much when all you did was exist, this is your moment. Don't look away. Subscribe. Some truths deserve witnesses." Emily reached into her folder and slid a document across the table. "Effective tonight," she said, "Ethan Walker is removed from consideration for promotion." Ethan stared at the paper. "You can't do this." "I already have." She slid another document forward. "And due to conduct unbecoming of a company representative, your current role is under review." His chest tightened. "You're destroying me." Emily held his gaze. "I'm stopping the damage." The chairman shifted uncomfortably. "There's also the matter of public perception." Emily nodded. "Handled." Ethan looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" Emily stood. "It means," she said, "you won't be the one telling this story." She walked toward the door. Ethan followed instinctively. "Emily, please." We can fix this. For the baby. She stopped. Turned. For the baby, she repeated softly. Exactly. She opened the door. Before leaving, she looked back at the board. Tomorrow morning, she said, legal will distribute findings. Until then, I suggest silence. Then her eyes returned to Ethan. Enjoy the rest of your evening. She left. The door closed. Ethan stood there, breathing hard, staring at the empty chair where she'd sat. His phone buzzed. A notification lit the screen. Trending. Mystery CEO reveals identity at Blackwood Gala. The video thumbnail showed Emily on stage. Pregnant. Powerful. The caption underneath read, her husband brought his girlfriend. Ethan's hands trembled. Outside the conference room, footsteps approached. And this time, they weren't coming to ask questions. They were coming to collect consequences. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat alone in the back seat of a rideshare, city lights streaking past the window like accusations he couldn't outrun. His phone vibrated non-stop in his hand, messages piling up faster than he could read them. Colleagues. Acquaintances. People who had never learned his last name until tonight. He didn't open any of them. He didn't need to. The story was already out of his control. By the time he reached his apartment, the headline had evolved. CEO's husband accused of deception at Blackwood Gala, sources confirm executive misconduct review. Ethan dropped his keys on the counter. They clattered loudly in the quiet apartment. Emily's apartment, no, their apartment, looked the same as it had that morning. Clean. Minimal. Thoughtful. A home he'd treated like a placeholder. He collapsed onto the couch, rubbing his face. His reflection stared back at him from the dark TV screen. Older, smaller, stripped of the shine he'd spent years polishing. His phone rang. Vanessa. He hesitated, then answered. What did you do? She demanded, voice shaking with fury and humiliation. Do you have any idea what's happening to me right now? Vanessa. No, she snapped. You don't get to say my name like we're still anything. I Googled her. Do you know what people are saying about me? Ethan closed his eyes. I never meant to hurt you. She laughed. Sharp. Brittle. You didn't mean to tell me the truth either. You let me walk into that room like a fool. I was going to explain. When? She cut in. After I moved in. After I quit my job because I thought you were my future. Silence stretched between them. You didn't just lie to your wife, Vanessa said quietly. You used me. The line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone long after the call ended. If you've ever watched someone destroy everything around them just to protect their ego, stay. Because this is the cost no one warns them about. Subscribe. Some people only learn when it's too late. The next morning came fast and unforgiving. Ethan woke to the sound of his phone alarm, and a new reality. He had over 300 notifications. News alerts. Emails. Missed calls. And one message sat at the top of his inbox, unopened. From Blackwood Legal. His pulse spiked. He opened it. Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative suspension pending the outcome of an internal and external review. You are not to contact staff, board members, or clients. Suspension. Not fired. Yet. Ethan dressed mechanically, hands shaking as he buttoned his shirt. He told himself this was temporary, that he could still talk his way out. That Emily wouldn't really go this far. She had to care. She was carrying his child. At the Blackwood headquarters, security was waiting. Badge, the guard said politely. Ethan froze. I just need to grab a few personal items. The guard shook his head. You can submit a list. They'll be mailed. Mail. Like a terminated employee. As Ethan turned away, he heard whispers. Phones raised. Someone filming. He lowered his head too late. By noon, the video was everywhere. Clips of Emily on stage. Ethan is standing beside Vanessa. The freeze frame where realization hit his face like a slap. Comment sections exploded. He was ashamed of her until she humiliated him. Men like this always want power without earning it. Imagine hiding your pregnant wife. Ethan threw his phone onto the bed. Across town, Emily sat in her office, sunlight cutting across the hardwood floor. Legal documents lay neatly arranged on her desk. She didn't look tired. She looked resolved. Her assistant knocked softly. "Ma'am, the press is requesting a statement." Emily nodded. "Schedule it for this afternoon." "And Ethan?" the assistant asked carefully. Emily's hand rested on her stomach. "He'll hear from my attorney." She looked out at the city. Power had never been about punishment. It was about boundaries. Back in the apartment, Ethan stared at the ceiling, chest tight, mind racing. He told himself he could still make things right. That he could still reach her. He picked up his phone and typed a message. "Emily, please. We need to talk. Not as executives. As family." He hit send. The message showed as delivered. Then, read. 3 dots appeared. Ethan sat up. Hope flared. Then vanished. A reply came through. "We will communicate through counsel. Do not contact me again." Ethan dropped the phone. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Inside, the weight of everything he'd done finally settled. And somewhere between shame and panic, Ethan realized the truth he'd spent years avoiding. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about status. This was about the one thing he'd never learned how to be. A man who deserved to stand beside her. And tomorrow, the world would learn just how much that failure was going to cost him. The press conference filled before the cameras finished adjusting. Emily stood just off stage, listening to the low murmur of reporters hungry for blood disguised as curiosity. Questions floated through the air, some sharp, some careless, all waiting for her. Her attorney leaned in. "You don't owe them anything." Emily nodded. "I know." She stepped forward anyway. The room snapped to attention. Flashbulbs exploded. "Ms. Walker, Emily, over here." She took her place behind the podium, hands steady, posture composed. No notes. No script. She didn't need one. "I'm going to make this brief," she said. The noise died instantly. "Last night, my identity became public in a way I never intended," Emily continued. "I understand the fascination. But I want to redirect the focus." A reporter interrupted. "Is it true your husband brought another woman to the gala?" Emily's gaze didn't waver. "Yes." A ripple moved through the room. "Is Blackwood taking disciplinary action because of your marriage?" Emily shook her head. "Blackwood is taking action because of conduct. The two are not the same." She paused. "And for the record, no one loses power by being honest. They lose it by being afraid of the truth." That line spread faster than the live stream itself. Across town, Ethan watched the broadcast from his couch, phone discarded beside him like a dead thing. He hadn't shaved. He hadn't eaten. He barely recognized the man staring back at him from the dark screen. Emily didn't mention his name. That hurt more than being exposed. Because erasure was worse than disgrace. When the conference ended, Ethan's phone rang again. This time, it was his mother. "Ethan," she said, voice tight. "Why didn't you tell us who your wife was?" He closed his eyes. It didn't matter. There was a long silence on the line. "It mattered to you," she said finally. "And now it matters to everyone." She hung up. Ethan stood and paced the apartment, chest tight, thoughts spiraling. He told himself Emily was overreacting. That this was temporary. That marriages survived worse. Then the knock came. Sharp. Official. Ethan opened the door to find a courier holding an envelope. "Ethan Walker?" "Yes. You've been served." The door closed before he could respond. His hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Divorce papers. Filed that morning. He sank onto the floor. If you've ever begged someone for respect after you already gave them love, this is where the lie breaks. Stay. Subscribe. Because this isn't cruelty, it's consequence. Hours later, Ethan found himself sitting across from his lawyer, the words still echoing in his ears. She's requesting full separation of assets, the lawyer said carefully. Given the prenup and your conduct, it's solid. Ethan laughed hollowly. She's punishing me. The lawyer didn't respond. She's pregnant, Ethan insisted. She won't go through with it. The lawyer folded his hands. She already has. That night, a new article surfaced. Inside Blackwood. Internal review expands. The subheading made Ethan's stomach drop. Sources confirm investigators are examining whether Ethan Walker used his position to misrepresent corporate affiliations for personal gain. Personal gain. Vanessa. Introductions. Access. Ethan's phone buzzed again, this time from an unfamiliar number. This is HR. We need clarification regarding multiple interactions you had with external parties while representing Blackwood. His chest tightened. He hadn't thought those moments mattered. Emily had. Across the city, Emily sat alone in the nursery she'd begun preparing weeks earlier. Soft light. Half-assembled crib. A future she'd imagined differently. She exhaled slowly. Her attorney's voice echoed from earlier that day. He's going to claim retaliation. Emily smiled faintly. Let him. She reached into a folder and pulled out a flash drive. Years of documentation. Messages Ethan didn't realize were archived. Introductions he'd made. Promises he'd implied. Doors he'd tried to open by borrowing her shadow. She hadn't been passive. She'd been patient. Emily placed the flash drive into an envelope and sealed it. Tomorrow, it will be delivered. Back at the apartment, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. Another notification lit up his phone. Blackwood board meeting. Emergency session. Scheduled for the next morning. Mandatory attendance. His reflection stared back at him from the mirror across the room. For the first time, he understood something too late. Emily wasn't destroying him. She was letting the truth finish what his insecurity had started. And tomorrow, in a room full of people who finally saw him clearly, Ethan Walker would learn just how expensive shame could be. The boardroom felt colder than Ethan remembered. Same glass walls. Same polished table. Same skyline stretching beyond it. But the energy had shifted. Where confidence once lived, judgment now waited patiently. Ethan took the empty seat at the far end. No one greeted him. Emily wasn't there yet. The chairman cleared his throat. Let's begin. A screen lit up. Email chains. Calendar invites. Photos. Moments Ethan barely remembered, now arranged into a story he couldn't interrupt. Over the past 18 months, the chairman said, Mr. Walker presented himself to external parties as a senior decision-maker with implied authority. That's not true, Ethan blurted out. I never signed anything. Emily's voice cut through the room. Intent doesn't require a signature. She entered quietly, taking her seat without ceremony. Ethan's breath caught. She looked calm. Centered. Untouchable. You leveraged proximity, Emily continued, eyes on the screen, not him. You didn't steal funds. You stole credibility. The board members nodded. That's corporate fraud, someone said. Ethan stood. I was trying to build something, for us. Emily finally looked at him. For you, she corrected. At my expense. If you've ever watched someone rewrite their betrayal as sacrifice, stay. Subscribe. This is where the mask finally slips. The screen changed again. A recorded message played, Vanessa's voice, unaware, casual. He said his wife didn't matter. That she didn't understand this world. Ethan lunged for the table. "Turn it off." Emily raised a hand. The room obeyed her. "You didn't just lie about me," she said quietly. "You trained others to disrespect me." Silence. The chairman folded his hands. "The board has reached a preliminary conclusion." Ethan's pulse thundered. Effective immediately, the chairman continued, "Your employment with Blackwood Global is terminated." The word hit hard. Terminated. Ethan laughed. Short. Broken. "You can't fire me. I built relationships here." Emily stood. "And I built the company." She slid a final document across the table. "There's one more matter," she said. "Given your actions, Blackwood will pursue damages." Ethan's knees weakened. "You're trying to ruin me." Emily's voice softened. Not with mercy, but certainty. "No. I'm protecting what I built." Security appeared at the door. Ethan looked around the room, at faces that once smiled at him, now unreadable. As he was escorted out, his phone buzzed again. A new headline. Blackwood CEO files for sole custody. Ethan stopped walking. "That's not," his voice cracked. "She wouldn't." Emily's gaze met his one last time. "She already has." The doors closed behind him. And for the first time, Ethan understood the truth no one had ever forced him to face. Losing power is loud. But losing respect? That's permanent. Outside, cameras waited. And tomorrow, the world would hear the rest. The courthouse steps were already crowded when Ethan arrived. Cameras. Microphones. Reporters shouting his name like it was bait. "Mr. Walker, did you exploit your wife's position? Is it true you're under investigation for fraud? Are you fighting for custody or control?" Ethan kept his head down, jaw clenched, shoulders stiff. Every flash felt like a punch. Every question felt deserved. And that made it worse. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and consequence. He sat at the defendant's table, hands folded tightly, knuckles white. His lawyer whispered something about strategy, optics, and restraint. Ethan barely listened. The door opened. Emily walked in. No cameras allowed inside, but everyone felt it anyway. The shift, the gravity, the quiet respect that followed her like a shadow. She wore a simple navy dress. No jewelry. No theatrics. Just composure. Pregnant. Unshaken. Ethan stood without realizing it. She didn't look at him. That hurt more than anything else. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Emily's attorney spoke first. Measured, precise, devastating. They laid out the pattern. Not drama. Not emotion. Pattern. How Ethan introduced himself. How he implied authority. How he leveraged access. How he hid his marriage when it benefited him, and invoked it when it didn't. Then came the messages. Not the loud ones. The quiet ones. Emails where Ethan wrote, "I can make that happen." Texts that said, "I'll talk to my wife." Calendar invites he labeled, "Executive Review." Each one landed like a nail. Ethan's lawyer stood quickly. "My client never received financial gain." Emily's attorney didn't flinch. He gained proximity, influence, status. The judge nodded slightly. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Then Emily stood. She didn't need to. Everyone knew that. But she did anyway. "I didn't come here to punish the father of my child," she said softly. "I came to protect my child from learning the wrong lesson." Ethan looked up. Her eyes finally met his. "For years," she continued, "I believed love meant minimizing myself so someone else could feel bigger. I was wrong." The courtroom was silent. "If you've ever been told to dim your light to keep someone comfortable," she said, voice steady, "this is me saying, don't." She turned slightly toward the judge. "I'm requesting full custody not out of spite," Emily said, "but out of clarity." A child should grow up seeing honesty modeled, not entitlement. Ethan's lawyer objected. Weakly. The judge raised a hand. I've seen enough, the judge said. This court will take custody under advisement. A pause. And pending further review, supervised visitation only. The words echoed. Supervised. Ethan slumped back into his chair. If you've ever watched someone lose everything because they couldn't respect the one person who stood beside them, stay. Subscribe. Because this is where the reckoning gets personal. Outside the courtroom, Emily exited through a side door. Ethan followed, ignoring his lawyer's frantic whispering. Emily, wait. She stopped. Didn't turn. You don't have to do this, he said, voice breaking. I made mistakes. I can change. She faced him slowly. You didn't make a mistake, she said. You made a choice. Repeatedly. I loved you, he insisted. She studied him for a long moment. No, she said gently. You loved how I made you feel, until I stopped pretending to be smaller than you. That landed harder than any ruling. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Our child will know who you are, Emily said. But they'll also know who I refuse to become. She turned to leave. Ethan reached out, but stopped himself. Across the street, reporters swarmed. Emily, any comment on the custody ruling? Is this the end for Ethan Walker? Emily paused. Just once. This isn't the end, she said calmly. This is accountability. She walked away. Ethan stood alone on the steps. A notification buzzed on his phone. Breaking. Federal inquiry expands into misuse of executive influence. He stared at the screen. This wasn't just about marriage anymore. This was about the law. And as sirens wailed somewhere down the street, Ethan finally understood the truth he'd avoided for years. Being ashamed of the wrong person doesn't make you powerful. It makes you dangerous. And tomorrow, the consequences would no longer be emotional. They would be criminal. Ethan woke to the sound of his phone buzzing non-stop. Emails. Texts. Notifications from every news outlet in the country. His face appeared in headlines he had no control over. Shameful husband exposed by CEO wife. Ethan Walker under investigation for executive misrepresentation. Public humiliation of pregnant CEO's husband sparks outrage. He tried to scroll, tried to rationalize, but it all hit at once. The weight of every lie, every small act of humiliation he had thrown at Emily, now bouncing back like a relentless storm. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't slept. He hadn't even looked at the calendar. He couldn't stop imagining her, poised, pregnant, unstoppable, and utterly untouchable. His phone rang. Vanessa. Where are you? She demanded. Do you even realize what you've done? He started. You used me, she yelled, cutting him off. You lied about your wife, you paraded me in front of everyone, and now you're a joke. He swallowed, choking on his pride. I didn't think. You didn't think, she spat. You never think about anyone but yourself. You deserve everything coming to you. She hung up before he could respond. He dropped the phone. It slid across the carpet like a piece of evidence. By mid-morning, the board at Blackwood had called an emergency session. Every senior executive was present. Ethan had no choice but to attend, or risk being written out entirely before he had a chance to defend himself. The boardroom felt smaller than ever. The walls didn't just enclose him, they judged him. And the woman at the head of the table, Emily Walker, was no longer just his wife. She was the living embodiment of authority, intellect, and consequence. She looked at him once. That glance alone drained the room of air. Ethan, she said, calm but cutting, do you understand why you're here? I can explain, he stammered. Emily lifted a hand. No. You'll speak after the facts are presented. The chairman projected a slideshow. Each slide was a carefully documented moment of Ethan's deceit, emails where he misrepresented himself, meeting notes he manipulated to his advantage, photos from events where he paraded Vanessa as if she were his only partner in public life. Ethan's chest tightened. Each slide was a needle in his pride. The room murmured. Some executives whispered. Some leaned forward, eyes wide. They had known him as a colleague, a rising star. Now they saw him as a man who had built a house of lies on someone else's foundation. Emily continued. For years, Ethan has had opportunities. Every decision, every introduction, every representation he made to external parties has been a choice to elevate himself over honesty. Tonight, we review the consequences of those choices. Ethan's lawyer whispered. He can't fire you, yet. Emily's voice cut through. This isn't about firing. This is about accountability. The slides shifted again. This time, records of conversations between Ethan and Vanessa appeared, where he had misled her into believing she was part of his personal and professional life. The whispers grew louder. Some executives leaned back in disbelief. Some scribbled notes furiously. Ethan's throat went dry. It wasn't supposed to. Emily's hand rose, halting him. Stop. Just stop. She turned to the board. Given the evidence, I recommend immediate removal of Ethan Walker from all positions of authority and influence within Blackwood Global. Additionally, we pursue restitution for any damages incurred by his actions, including personal exploitation and misrepresentation. The board members nodded. Ethan felt heat rise in his face. You can't do this. Emily didn't respond. She simply reached into a folder, pulling out a flash drive. Everything he did. Everything he tried to hide. Collected, documented, and ready for review. The law will decide what else follows. A murmur ran through the room. Ethan stumbled backward. You're ruining me. Emily's voice was soft but deadly. I'm protecting the people who trusted me. And teaching a lesson that goes far beyond personal hurt. Outside, someone opened a window. The city buzzed. Sirens. Traffic. Life is going on as if nothing had happened. Inside, Ethan realized the magnitude of what he had lost. Not just his job, not just his image, but respect, trust, any claim to dignity. Emily's eyes met his one last time. This ends tonight. And with that, she stood, leaving him at the table surrounded by people who now saw him fully for the first time. Small, exposed, and accountable. Ethan's phone buzzed again. Another headline. Pregnant CEO crushes husband's career and lies. Public outrage erupts. He sank into his chair. And then a knock at the door. 2 security officers appeared. Mr. Walker, one said, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding company misrepresentation and possible legal consequences. Ethan froze. This wasn't just corporate. This wasn't just personal. This was legal. And as the door closed behind him, cameras flashing outside, Ethan finally understood. Humiliation was only the beginning. Consequences were just arriving. If you've ever been belittled, lied to, or used by someone who thought they were clever, stay with this story. Subscribe. Because what happens next is the reckoning that people like him never see coming. The elevator doors closed. And the floor began to fall. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and fear. Ethan sat alone, hands cuffed loosely on the table, eyes darting toward the one-way mirror he knew was recording him. Every second stretched, filled with the echo of his own heartbeat. The door opened, and a stern-looking investigator stepped in, file in hand. No introductions, no pleasantries, just purpose. Ethan Walker, the man began, voice low, measured. We have reason to believe you misrepresented your position at Blackwood Global to gain personal advantage. We have witness statements, email records, and third-party confirmations. Ethan swallowed. I didn't take anything. I didn't steal money. The investigator's eyes bored into him. Intent isn't the point. Influence, access, perception. You manipulated all of them. Do you understand the severity? Ethan nodded, though his thoughts scrambled. He tried to rationalize. She's overreacting. This will blow over. But then his phone vibrated. One new notification. From an unknown number. He opened it. Check the news. Now. The screen lit up, a live video feed from the gala, the one Emily had staged for exposure. Every misstep, every smug smile he had shown with Vanessa, every moment he thought he was clever, broadcast nationwide. The comments scrolled too fast to read, but the tone was unanimous. Disgusted. Angry. Humiliated. Ethan pressed his face into his hands. He had believed he could control this. That he could hide behind charm and lies. But the exposure was complete. The investigator leaned forward. We have been authorized to place you under temporary detention pending further inquiry. Your cooperation is your only leverage at this point. Ethan felt the room tilt. Detention. Legal scrutiny. This wasn't just corporate fallout anymore. The walls he had built around his pride were crumbling into rubble. A new wave of shame hit him. He wasn't just a failed husband or failed executive. He was a public spectacle. And everyone who had ever doubted Emily, everyone who had underestimated her, they were watching him fall. He remembered Vanessa. She had believed him, trusted him. And now, her own reputation was likely ruined because of his lies. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who thought they were clever, who thought they could play life like a game while hurting everyone else, this is the moment they pay. Subscribe. Because watching justice unfold isn't just satisfying, it's necessary. Ethan's phone buzzed again. Another headline. Pregnant CEO exposes husband's lies. Legal action underway. The words were sharp, cutting through every excuse he'd whispered to himself. The investigator stood. Mr. Walker, your next step is going to be difficult. You will answer questions in detail, under oath. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Ethan's chest tightened. I just wanted to fix things. A bitter laugh escaped him. I just wanted to fix us. The investigator's eyes didn't waver. You don't get to fix anything. Not anymore. You get to face what you did. The handcuffs tightened slightly as Ethan was escorted out. Cameras outside caught every step. Pedestrians whispered. Reporters shouted. The world he thought he could manipulate now recorded his every failure. He was no longer a husband. No longer an executive. No longer the man he had imagined himself to be. And somewhere in the distance, Emily's name trended again, this time as the woman who didn't just expose a liar, she dismantled him. As the doors of the police van closed, Ethan's mind raced. How do I survive this? How do I explain myself? How do I make her forgive me? He didn't know yet that forgiveness was never part of the plan. The van started moving. Lights flashing. Cameras capturing every angle. Ethan looked out the window, catching a glimpse of Emily's office tower in the distance. She was watching, always watching. And then he realized, this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Because someone who had been underestimated for too long wasn't done yet. And the next move. It would change everything. The courtroom was packed. Cameras from every angle, reporters leaning on the benches, flashes firing relentlessly. Ethan sat at the defendant's table, his suit wrinkled, his tie loose, his face pale. Every whisper, every glance, every flashbulb reminded him that the world now saw him in pieces. Emily entered calmly. Pregnant. Poised. Radiant. Her presence alone silenced the room. She didn't need words. Every step she took was authority, every breath a challenge to the man who had once thought he could diminish her. The judge called the court to order. We are here for the final hearing regarding Ethan Walker and the claims brought forth by Blackwood Global and Ms. Emily Walker. Ethan's lawyer leaned over, whispering frantic instructions, but Ethan barely heard him. His mind was a storm of shame, panic, and disbelief. Emily rose to speak first. Her voice carried effortlessly, clear, calm, unstoppable. Your Honor, my goal here is not vengeance. It is accountability. She outlined every transgression, misrepresentation of authority, exploitation of trust, deliberate deceit, public humiliation. Her tone never wavered. She wasn't angry. She was precise, cold, uncompromising. Ethan opened his mouth to defend himself, but the room seemed to close around him. Every lie, every misstep, every manipulation was documented, displayed, and undeniable. You acted as if proximity to my success was yours to take, Emily said, her eyes locking on his. You paraded others as if to hide me, minimized me as if my worth were negotiable. Your actions were deliberate. They were calculated. And they were cruel. The gallery murmured. Ethan felt the weight of it all. Friends, colleagues, strangers, judging him. He had thought he could navigate the world without consequences. Tonight, he understood he was entirely wrong. Emily paused. We all face moments in life when we are forced to choose between truth and comfort, honesty and cowardice. Some people choose the latter repeatedly. Others, like me, choose accountability. For our families. For our future. And for justice. Her words cut deep. Ethan's shoulders slumped. He tried to speak, but the courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for him to crumble. The judge leaned forward. Given the evidence presented and the witness statements confirming deliberate misrepresentation and public deception, this court finds that Mr. Walker's conduct warrants removal from any executive or managerial position. Custody of the child shall remain with Ms. Walker. Supervised visitation is permitted, contingent upon court approval and further review. Ethan's world spun. Termination. Custody. Public shame. Legal ramifications. The storm he had created in trying to hide his insecurity had finally returned to drown him. Emily remained calm, her hand resting lightly on her belly. A small smile, almost imperceptible, crossed her face, not of triumph, but of relief. She had protected her child, her company, and herself. If you've ever been underestimated, belittled, or hidden behind someone else's ego, stay. Subscribe. Because this is how justice looks when it is deliberate, thoughtful, and uncompromising. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Ethan walked through a gauntlet of cameras and microphones, the flashes turning his shame into a spectacle for the world. He tried to meet Emily's gaze, but she had already disappeared into a waiting car. Security and her team ensured she moved swiftly, shielded from the chaos. The city lights reflected off the sleek car as it pulled away, carrying her away from the wreckage he had caused. Ethan stood frozen on the steps, realizing for the first time that his mistakes were permanent. The story wasn't about him, it was about her strength, her resilience, and the consequences he could no longer avoid. Hours later, as Ethan sat alone in an apartment that now felt like a cell, a message appeared on his phone. Breaking. Blackwood Global announces full transparency initiative, all internal reviews to be public. He dropped the phone. His reflection in the dark screen stared back at him, a man reduced to his own failings. And somewhere in the distance, Emily's office tower glimmered against the night sky, a beacon of power she had claimed back with every calculated move he had ignored. The world had seen the truth. His lies had been stripped bare. And the lesson was clear. Arrogance and insecurity, when wielded against those who refuse to be diminished, lead to total ruin. Emily's voice echoed in his mind, calm, unwavering. Accountability isn't punishment, it's recognition of what your actions cost others. The final headline ran across every news outlet. Pregnant CEO protects legacy and child. Husband's misrepresentation exposed nationwide. And for the millions who watched, the message was undeniable. Honesty, courage, and integrity can outshine arrogance and deceit every single time. If you've ever been hidden, humiliated, or underestimated, remember this story. Let it remind you. Never let anyone make you feel small. Stand tall. Speak your truth. Protect yourself. Subscribe, stay aware, and don't let anyone dim your light, because there's always someone like Emily ready to ensure justice is served.